It's the morning of December 14th, 2009. I'm Michael Aron. We're in Roseland this morning at the office of Carella Byrne. Charles Carella has had associations with Brendan Byrne going back to 1959. He and Governor Byrne have been law partners since the governor left the governorship in 1982. And we're going to talk to him this morning for the Rutgers program on the governor, the Brendan Byrne Archive. Charlie, when did you first become aware of Brendan Byrne?
Probably in the year 1959, maybe even 58. And it's kind of a long time, so I'm not exact in when.
And how did you become aware of him?
Interestingly, we both belonged to St. Joseph's Roman Catholic Church in St. Cloud section of West Orange. And I taught confraternity, a Christian doctrine, catechism. And Tommy, Brendan's son, was in my class. So Brendan would come on a Sunday morning and usually drop Tommy off and go to Mass, and then I would see him later. He would bring donuts, and that's when I really met him informally.
And what was he at the time, and what were you at the time?
He was prosecutor of Essex County, and I'm not sure whether he was acting or was the prosecutor. And I was just a new kid attorney.
You like him?
Oh, yeah.
Why?
Yeah. He and I kind of had many things in common, and Brendan was he had an incredible humor and wit. It was evident even in those days when we were young. We were kind of kids, really.
How old were you back at the time?
Well, I'm 76 today, so and go back 58. That's 51 years, something like that. 51 years.
So you were about 25 years old.
Yeah.
And he, same
Brendan's,
age?
we're 10 years apart.
Uh-huh. So he was.
I'm 76. He's 86.
Okay. Did you go to work for him in the prosecutor's office?
I went to work for him.
Did he
as an assistant,
offer you a job? I mean, because he liked you and you had this rapport? How did that come about?
I went down and chatted with him, and he said, yeah, you know, why don't you come aboard? In those days, it was part-time. An assistant prosecutor in Essex County was part-time, and when I was hired, I would say maybe around $8,000 a year.
So you had a private practice as well?
I was practicing law in Nutley.
What did you do for the prosecutor's office?
When I first went in, I did what new attorneys in the prosecutor's office usually do. You would get into the trial court system and try some cases, which is what I did. We had an interesting office in those days. I think when I was there, we were about 12 or 13.
That's all?
That would be 11 assistant prosecutors and the boss. And today, I'm told it's well over 120 assistant prosecutors and the prosecutor.
I'm sure it is.
Then, as time went on, what we did is we established the first organized crime section in the prosecutor's office. We called it the Charlie Squad. It was made up of Charlie Carella, Charlie Doogie, Charlie Acasella. And we handled organized crime. We had a special grand jury. I had undercover detectives, state police, really. And we dealt primarily and only with organized crime. In those days, it was more bookmaking and gambling and not as much narcotics. But as time went on, narcotics was also involved in our jurisdiction.
The next governor of New Jersey worked at a law firm called Doogie Hewitt. Was that Charlie Doogie?
Charlie Doogie was a detective.
Okay. How many years did you spend in the prosecutor's office?
I left in '63, so say from '59 to '63, and then I went back in '65 and handled a special grand jury, organized crime.
You went back in '65 to handle a special grand jury. Who'd you prosecute?
We had in those days a series of bookmakers and loan sharks, and we handled those kinds of matters that were prevalent in Essex at that time.
Who'd you work with in the office? People who would later become part of the scene in Trenton.
It was a great office. Joe Lordi was first assistant prosecutor. Okay, June Strelecki was an assistant prosecutor. The office, as we went through the years, had many talented lawyers who went on and became part of government as well. Angelo Bianchi was an assistant prosecutor, became banking commissioner. Jimmy Zazzali was an assistant prosecutor, became attorney general, and then ultimately the chief justice of the state of New Jersey. Justin Walder was an assistant prosecutor.
Today,
he's
a prominent defense attorney.
Prominent defense attorney. As a matter of fact, he shares the third floor here in this building with us. So I see a lot of Justin as well.
Marty Greenberg.
Marty Greenberg, an assistant prosecutor, became a state senator and a judge. Van Clinton, who is now dead, assistant prosecutor, became a judge. Julie Feinberg was an assistant prosecutor, became a Superior Court judge. And June Strelecki, as I said, became motor vehicle director and also became a Superior Court judge.
Barry Evanchik.
Barry Evanchik, I left before Barry. I don't think he was there when I was there.
Sandy Jaffe.
Sandy Jaffe was there, yes. Sandy was there.
That's quite a group of people.
Almost everybody. I said we're only 13. 12, 13, and I called Brendan BT. BT was the boss.
And BT went on to have a rather stellar career.
Well, BT left the prosecutor's office and became president of the Board of Public Utilities, Superior Court judge, and then ultimately the governor.
And what did you do along the way, as those things were happening?
As they were happening, I kept in contact with Brendan all the way through, socially and professionally, basically. When I left the prosecutor's office, I started a little firm in Nutley. It was just a few partners, and we practiced general practice of law.
Why Nutley? Were you from Nutley?
I had no, I was in West Orange. Nutley was the partner who I associated with, and that was Bob Citrino. Bobby Citrino was a Republican. He was the executive director of the Republican Party in Essex County.
Were you a Democrat?
I was a Democrat, and we practiced together there until I left to go to Trenton in 1973 with Brendan, basically 74. And then after I served in Trenton, well, let me go back. In 73, I was with Brendan in the election. I was, in those days, the Democratic chairman, I'm going to put quotes around that, here in Essex County.
Why do you put quotes around it?
Well, Harry Lerner was the chairman, and he was the real, elected chairman of the Democratic Party here in Essex. Ralph DeRose was his candidate. We ran against DeRose in the primary, and we won.
DeRose was a senator? Or?
DeRose was a senator.
What did it mean to take on the established party in this county? I mean, were you the reformers and they were the old guard, or how did it play out? And how much chutzpah did it take to challenge the party?
It took a lot. It took a lot. First of all, we ran a campaign and statewide. Brendan was the man that couldn't be bought. Okay, and basically, he was the white knight, and the knight in shining armor. We ran in Essex as that kind of a candidate. We were all young. I was a kid again in those days compared to the organization. We didn't have the kind of money that the organization had, but we ran a ticket here in Essex County.
What made Brendan? I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
But Brendan was a native son, was the prosecutor previously, and that kind of stuck, even though he was a judge. And in those days, it had some meaning.
What do you mean?
Well, corruption was an issue. Not like corruption today, because Brendan was very noticeable as the knight in shining armor, and we played. I think it came up on a tape. There was a member of organized crime, allegedly, Gyp DiCarlo, who was caught on tape saying you couldn't go near Brendan Byrne and his office. Can't deal with them. They're not for sale.
That was worth a lot politically to have had that captured on tape, wasn't it?
That was it was a campaign item that was a major item in the campaign.
What was Brendan Byrne like as a boss in the prosecutor's office?
In the prosecutor's office, he was, well, we started off with every Friday. We had staff meetings. And every prosecutor, every assistant prosecutor would be in there and discussing matters that they handled during the preceding week. Started off with what kind of cases we were handling, and Brendan had hands-on policy. He knew precisely what was going on. He tried cases. He was very interested in the what was going before the grand jury, and he was very proactive as a prosecutor. Brendan became, as long as I know him, from day one till today, he's a man who was interested in people that were. He was interested in government and interested in the people that were being governed. As a prosecutor, his interest wasn't really to grab headlines. It was really to do a job that had to be done, to see that everything was done fairly and openly. And Brendan was a great guy for working with, because you can go in and talk with him and go over the case with him. And these were contemporaries. We were young guys. We're not 50 years behind or 20 years behind. We were contemporaries with BT. And we had fun. It was a fun kind of thing. Every Friday, not every, but most Fridays, we would go to the same restaurant, Vesuvio's in Newark. Vesuvius, not O. It was on Bloomfield Avenue. We had the
whole office would go?
whoever, well, we were only 13 guys and gals. Whoever was available, we would go down there. And Tess was the operator, the phone operator, and the receptionist at the same time. And she would take your order, shoot it into the restaurant, and we would get there and kind of fool around and relax on a Friday. I guess they don't do that today. I don't think you have that camaraderie. I don't think you can have it. But we used to do things like that. Joe Lord, I would be there, Bianchi and Brendan and whoever was available.
You talked about the Charlie Squad. Tell us a little more about the Charlie Squad.
What we did was really took the entire Essex County, all of the municipalities. We encouraged informants through publicity. We would have stakeouts. We would follow organized criminals that were known, organized crime participants, and we would put them under surveillance. We would obtain search warrants, and we would find areas in the county where there was some form of organized illegal gambling. We did the same thing with narcotics. We would utilize information that we got, either through investigations or anonymous calls. We had state troopers who were undercover, and we would ultimately work up an investigation, effectuate a raid, strike the...
How many prosecutions do you think you had?
In those, first of all, it was unheard of, because in the statewide, there was no unit like our unit here in Essex. Hudson didn't have it. I mean, they had them later, but we were the first organized crime unit. We were first in Essex, and we were very busy. So we were very active, very busy, and very much involved in taking the case from its inception to its ending point. How many cases? Probably in a given period had to be hundreds. Of course, they were all different levels.
Right. Anybody famous that you prosecuted?
We tried. We had Jip DiCarlo in there. We had. Trying to think, my memory is escaping me. The numbers guy here in Essex, and we got him. I'll think of it later on.
The Essex guy was Richie the Boot Boyardo.
Richie the Boot Boyardo, and those named defendants came later on.
You say you practiced law in Nutley as Brendan Byrne moved to the BPU and to a judgeship. What's your recollection about, and that you were still personally friendly with him, you socialized with him. What's your recollection about learning that he wanted to run for governor? Do you recall?
Well, as I said, he was on the bench at the time. And there were all kinds of issues that were coming up that New Jersey was really facing. Brendan brought to the scene as a potential candidate a Mr. Clean, okay? As I said previously, this knight in shining armor. when he first got involved, we touched base with a number of other leaders in other counties, tested to see what, in fact, kind of support you would have. But going back, Brendan gave me a call. I went up to have lunch with him in Morristown. And that's when he told me he was thinking of...
And what did you think?
I thought it would be a great, he would make a great candidate. I thought it would be good for the state. I thought he could win. Now, why did we think he could win? Well, he brought a new approach, a freshness, a candidate who wouldn't have the stain of old line politics in New Jersey. And we took that and ran with those kinds of ideas and concepts.
Who were the key people pushing him to run back then, in 73?
73, we had Fitzpatrick in Hudson. I think Fitzpatrick was the mayor of Bayonne and a leader in Hudson County. We formulated a group here in Essex that was made up of more than just neophytes like myself. There were leaders here in Essex as well, some who were not openly opposing Harry Lerner, okay? We had support of Dick Coffey and Mercer. We had various. We had Passaic County as well. We had Middlesex County with individuals who were very much pro Brendan Byrne and anti-old line, okay? Politics in those...
Was the Willents family part of that in Middlesex?
Willents was part of that.
Why did Harry Lerner oppose Brendan Byrne?
Harry had his own candidate. Harry Lerner and Ralph DeRose were close to start with. Harry had his own organization here in Essex. Harry didn't think Brendan could win. He didn't think he could win the election. He thought Ralph DeRose would. He played on this part that Ralph DeRose was the Italian-American candidate, and he would be able to get his counties that he counted, which never really materialized. And Harry thought that he can be much more in power with Ralph than he would be with Brendan.
What do you know about Brendan Byrne's family's views of his running for governor?
Well, going back, Brendan's father was very much involved in local politics. And I guess if you had to take a look at how we got together, Brendan's father and my father-in-law were friends in West Orange. The Byrne name was very much well known in West Essex and in Essex County, along with the Degnans and John Degnan's family. And that made up a good nucleus around which you can develop a candidate. So, yes, there was Brendan Byrne. There was his father, who I think would be very much involved with Brendan's background and history in the area, and there was his brother, who was a doctor, very well known in West Orange and in Essex County.
How about
His sisters and
How about his wife?
Jean. Jean was also from the area, and she wasn't Catholic. Didn't go to our church. She went to church up in St. Cloud, same area. I never really could tell whether she was for it or against it. Jean was a very private kind of person, and as time went on, became friendly with my wife, and we saw them as Brendan and Jean. They played tennis together. They played paddle tennis together.
Who, Jean and your wife?
Yes, and then they had common friends and so forth.
So you're not.
So when
you're not sure whether Jean was happy about the running for governor.
I don't really. I don't think she ever opposed it. I don't think she ever really got that much involved in the politics of it.
What did you do during the '73 campaign, for the campaign?
What I did is I actually stepped back and away from the practice for a while. We had a number of headquarters that we opened, different parts of the county. We met on a regular basis here in Essex County. June Strelecki was helping me. We then organized Republicans for Byrne, Italian Americans for Byrne, those kinds of political, I'm going to call them political operatives here in the county. We spent time, we went to meetings, we sat with Brendan, we went over what was being done and what had to be done. We worked up fundraising efforts, and
did you have a lot of connections in Essex County?
well, we were known. I was known in Essex County, but again, I was young and a new kid on the block. And yes, we had many people that we knew, and we went to all of them and put together a group here in the county, and then worked it up so that also became part of a statewide organization.
So you suspended your time with the law firm, and you worked on the campaign pretty much
every day.
What was Brendan Byrne like as a candidate, as a politician? I mean, here's a man who had been a prosecutor and a judge, and the judge has to be sort of non-political. What was he like as a fledgling politician?
I think in those days, one of the things that everyone kind of mentioned and so forth was that Brendan was not a great speaker, and they played it up. You know, they were kind of, you know, gee, he isn't really a guy that you would want to sit down and listen to for a long, long time. And he would greet you in a very informal way. Hey, how you doing? That kind of thing.
I can hear that. That's pretty good.
And but you know, it was his sincerity and the way he was. Now, of course, as time went on, down to the present day, when I think of BT from then to now, he's the master of the one-liners today. He has a wit that's unparalleled. He's still very, very much an ordinary guy. Never was a guy seeking to devote all his time trying to fill his pockets, so to speak. Brendan was more of a man interested in government and what he can do to help the government.
he won the primary that year. Well, let me go back for a second. Did you talk to him about the speaking and his campaign style? Did
Oh,
you?
wait a minute. I used to, well, it was teasing more than speaking. But then ultimately, I don't know whether it was in the after he became, and we went in the second term. There was criticism about Brendan's speaking and so forth, but he developed into a real master, as I said, of the one-liners. More today than even then. Did we speak to him? Sure. We kind of teased, and everyone would.
Did you do anything to try to improve him as a public speaker? Did you send him for lessons to New York or something?
He went to who the heck was it? David Garth. I spent some time with David Garth. All right.
The political consultant in New York.
Yeah. And Garth would, make suggestions and try to get him to be a little bit more effective. But I thought he was okay. I thought he was effective.
So you stayed with the campaign through the primary and into the general election. Tell us what you remember about both the primary and the general election.
In the primary, I was much more here in Essex County, and then obviously when he wins in the primary, the organization became the the real front runner for the political operatives here in the county, and that was of course statewide. I didn't have that kind of a role in the general election, although I would be with Brendan. I traveled with him a lot. If there were places that he was going to go to speak and so forth, on some occasions I would be with him.
Who did he beat in the primary?
He beat the primary. He beat. Now you're talking about the 73.
73.
It was DeRose and. Well, there was a whole slew of them in there. Ann Klein and who else? There was another. I don't.
Okay. And meanwhile, on the Republican side, Charlie Sandman beat Governor Cahill. Right.
Cahill had a problem. Cahill had many of the issues that we were talking about in terms of. Corruption and members of his staff that were involved in corrupt practices.
When Sandman upset Cahill, was that a big boost to the Byrne contingent?
I thought so.
Why?
I didn't think that Sandman was a formidable kind of a candidate.
Because?
Sandman himself, I don't think he had a platform. I don't think he had anything to run on. I don't think he had anything put before the nice fellow and all, but anything to put before the public. Brendan had this almost this Kennedy appeal as a candidate. At least I saw it that way, and I thought that would be the most important factor. He was young. He was honest. He was able to convey his thoughts in the manner in which he did it, which was very, very almost an informal kind of an approach.
That's very interesting. I've never heard Brendan Byrne compared to John Kennedy before, but you saw him in that way.
He had the same kind of an approach, I thought. I mean, you may not have given it any real
I can see
thought
it.
at the time, but
what you're driving at.
Brendan had the youth, Brendan had the sincerity, and Brendan had the ability to get people to listen. And as Brendan went through whatever it was that he was doing, let's start with the prosecutor's office. He was able always to make judgments, to put the right people around him. I would take his administration as prosecutor, one of the best ever. He had the most talented people, people who were able to go on, and as they did, and provide clear-cut, almost a super kind of a lawyer, prosecutor's days. Carry that through, all the way through. And I don't know too much about the cases before him on the Board of Public Utilities. But as a judge, he had the same thing. He had this ability to deal with issues. And then he goes in and he becomes governor. He was always able to put people around him who were stars in their own field and their own ability to think through issues. Think of it. Dick Leone, Lou Caden, we had as AG first Billy Hyland, okay, John Degnan, Alan Sagner was in there for a period of time. Those around him were able to deal with the kinds of issues that were on the plate in those days, no different than today. But he accomplished things far beyond any other governor, I think, anyway. And if you went back, probably far beyond any other prosecutor in those days. He organized the prosecutor's office in a way that is a model for today. I'm told he did the same in the Board of Public Utilities. As a judge, he was a good judge. He was a master at the ability to know the subject matter before him, and in a very, very off-the-record, less formality, more informality, with the manner in which he conducted himself. Now, fast forward to governor's office. Same thing.
Unpretentious, is that?
Yeah, well, Brendan never really worked at trying to foster himself or worry about his own income, so to speak, his own career pattern. I think Brendan just came along.
Sometimes, though, that gets criticized in a politician. We have a governor leaving office now who some say he didn't tend to his political image enough to get reelected. And you're saying that it was kind of the key to your friend's success, that he didn't tend to himself.
Brendan had I think there's a big distinction here. Brendan had an ability to put people around him who were good at whatever it was that they were doing. Corzine in the last 4 years, and this is my observation, didn't have political operatives. And I think that's a big difference. Brendan utilized political operatives. He was able to make decisions based on input, political input. Corzine, I don't think, wanted to go that route. I thought Corzine was more intent on disassociating himself, keeping himself distant from the political operatives and that whole structure. And I think that hurt him.
Do you recall election night 1973?
Yeah, I do recall. I think we were, and I don't know whether it was the old Goldman Hotel in West Orange, where we took the returns, yes. Then I went with them back to the house from there.
Good night.
Good night. Good night. A lot of fun. Very good night.
Did you play a role in the transition?
I was involved in the transition, but not an active, titled participant. But I spoke with Brendan often and spoke about people that were being considered for various positions and so forth.
How about you? Did he ask you to join the administration?
Yes, he did. He asked me to join. I went in first as the executive director of the lottery. And as time went on, one of the issues that I was involved with was the legalization of casino gambling.
Interesting that Charlie's squad went after gambling, and then you sort of presided over legal gambling, right?
And it's another interesting aspect. We were the first state, when I was in there as executive director of the lottery, to legalize the three-digit numbers game in a legalized way. It's called Picket. We put in and that reaped quite a bit of money for the state of New Jersey.
Was there some concern that 3 digits was too easy to fix, or?
No. We took the model of the illegal game, brought it in, and fashioned it after with some consultants, so that it is what it is today. Then we have a 3-digit game of 4. There's pick 3, pick 4. We had to pick it. Then you have all these other lottery games, these exotics, mega, super megas, $100 million, $80 million, rub-off games. But we took the model from the illegal, brought it into the legal, and moved it.
What were your feelings about coming to Trenton to work?
I didn't like it.
Why?
I didn't like, I'm a kind of a private kind of a person. Trenton is a fishbowl, open to all kinds of public scrutiny on a daily basis. I was more private. Aside from the fact that I had to drive down to Trenton every day from here, which in those days, of course, we had the turnpike. Well, it would take me a good hour and 15 minutes, hour and a half. Princeton, and I went to many, many meetings at Morven in those days. But I wasn't a guy for a day-to-day political life.
So how long did you last down here?
I didn't last too long at all. I stayed until 1976. Okay. Then I came out, and when I came out, I was chairman of the Racing Commission. And I stayed with that, and
More gambling.
more gambling.
Were you executive secretary to the governor at one point?
Yes. After, and you know, I was talking about this the other day, and I couldn't figure out. I think it was Don Land who was executive secretary to the governor, and I think he came in through the Ann Klein group, but I'm not sure of that, to be honest. I don't know how we got there. So I got a call from Brendan to come over. We chatted, and he asked me if I wanted to come into the office and the governor's office, and take the position of executive secretary, and I said I would.
Move from executive director of the lottery to
executive secretary to the governor.
Luther
did the same thing, as I think Luther first went in.
Henry Luther?
Henry Luther. He was with the lottery and then became executive secretary to the governor.
What is the executive secretary to the governor, or what was it?
In those days, probably the precursor to the chief of staff. You were very much involved in everyday activity of the governor. You supervised the office, the governor's office. You dealt with all of the coordinating issues that had to be presented to the governor. You prepared for cabinet meetings. You had your own staff as executive secretary. We had counsel. We had counsel to the governor. I would meet with counsel to the governor, Luke Caden. The treasurer was in the building. That was Dick Leone. So I would also meet with Dick on matters. You coordinated the efforts of the cabinet. You filtered the information that would be getting through the memorandum and so forth, the memoranda, to the governor. You attended the meetings, the cabinet meetings. I dealt with that side of it. I also dealt with the political side. I met with the county chairman on a regular basis. I dealt with all of the county chairmen. I handled the coordination of the legislative days when the members of the legislature were present, and would deal with them before or be briefed on what their issues were with the governor. I would deal with the governor in advance of those meetings.
Sounds like a lot more demanding of a job than being executive director of the lottery.
Much more. And as I said, as your time was so incredibly long, I couldn't handle it.
How long did you last?
Well, I would leave in the from up here at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I'd stay down in Trenton until 10 o'clock at night, 11 at night. It killed your life. And I wasn't really. I was more interested in those days in being what I was trained to be, and that was a lawyer.
So how long did you last?
I left in '76.
So maybe a year as executive secretary?
I think about a year. Just about a year.
Uh,
Maybe a year, a little more.
What was going on in the administration during that time? What was dominating the administration?
Well, we put the income tax in, and before I left. Actually, I think the income tax went in the summer of, was it, I don't know what year, 76. And I was telling Don before that we took the, Brendan, I buzzed him and I said, we're going to open up Meadowlands. And the track was, we were trying to figure out how to do that and what would be the right way to do it. Sonny Werbland was there at the Sports Authority. So we planned opening night. We would have the governor. I think it was Sonny Werbland and I'm not sure of who else. We rode in an open horse and carriage around the track. We were booed from the moment we got out to the moment that we left. I told the driver, just keep going. It was an incredible thing. You had to hear it. To be booed like that now, because Brendan and I talk about that often. They'll boo anybody at a track. Could be a nun, it could be anybody out there, they boo you.
Were any mistakes made in the passing of the income tax and that fight? Or was it just a long, hard fight? Perseverance.
And I'm going to tell you, you probably would never get it in today's day and age. That was That fight was probably, it culminated in my bringing the packet, the bill, into the I think I brought it into the legislature. Myself, I carried it in and put it on the table. That became the front page story in the New York Times. I was there bringing the bill in. It was a tough battle, yes, absolutely. We needed votes to do that. We would have the troopers go out and get our guys and bring them in. We needed everyone to help. Harry Lerner, everybody. Those days different than today because you had a strong county chairman. The whole concept then was strong county chairman as opposed to even today. You don't have that same kind of a political operative.
Why was that a good thing?
It was a good thing because you can deal with one person, basically, and he would be responsible for getting the votes that you needed. Now you deal directly
With the legislators.
with the legislators, and that's probably more open about it and less of a vehicle for deviation, less of a vehicle for corruption and so on and so on. You deal with one person, and the others were, responsible to the county chairman. So yes, if you were looking at the best political way to do it, one person. If you're looking at it for clean government and open government, one man, one vote, deal with that, but it's much more laborious. It's a tougher road. And the issues then were very much similar. You had a budget that couldn't be met. You had all kinds of problems, and you had the income tax that we didn't have, and bang, it came in.
Did you think that the income tax would keep Brendan Byrne from being reelected?
I thought it would be I thought it was the right thing to do, and it wasn't really tailored to his reelection because most everyone thought that would be the downfall of his second term. One-term Byrne.
Did you express to him your thoughts about whether or not he should run for re-election?
Yeah, we had many discussions.
What was your feeling?
My feeling that he should run. John Degnan was probably more vocal in terms of he thought he would win. The issue wasn't whether or not he should run. Now, I was outside the administration in the second term. I wasn't in government as such. So I said to BT, "You'll do all right. You'll win."
Really?
And I thought that he did enough in being a governor at that point, that the people would understand and they would come along and be with us.
What did he do besides pass an income tax?
Well, if you went back in history, Brendan probably did more than anybody. Now, I don't know the historical, give me a timeline, but he did the income tax. Some people would say, what, that's not a plus, that's a minus. I think it's a plus, because what he did is he balanced and made the fairest way to support and pay for government, and that is the income tax. There are some havens today still without it, but I don't think that's the right way to go. I think it's the most equitable way is to have an income tax as your basis of a revenue source for government. He did legalize gambling in Atlantic City. I think that was an incredible thing to do. I was aware of that, and there were a couple of different ways to go. We went the way of non-state-owned casinos and opened it up to a competitive marketplace, similar in kind to what was in Vegas, as opposed to what was in some of the island casino gambling, which was owned and operated by government.
Was that a discussion that
That was a
had to be had?
discussion. We went a couple of rounds on different ways of going. And if you were looking at it from the point of view of a free marketplace for casino gambling, we were of the opinion that you can have a clean, non-corrupt casino gambling regulated by the state. And that's the model that was put in here. Much again like Vegas. So he handled that. Who would even? I don't know of anyone who even thought of that up to that point in time. The Pinelands that Brendan put in, incredible in this little state to have that that carved out land for in perpetuity. When you look at the totality of what he did, whatever was set forth, he put in. I think Brendan also brought back the public defender. We didn't have a public defender. I saw him the other night, and he reminded me of something. I saw him on TV. And he brought in, he's the one that put in the rebate checks. I don't think that should be a part of anything. I think if anything they need now to help, that's one thing that should be done away with. Brendan was very proactive. He was a doer. He did the Sports Authority. Cahill started it. We finished it, completed it. He was very active in the bonding of that, so to get it complete. Think of the things. If you went to the northern part of the state, Sports Authority, Giant Stadium, Meadowlands Racetrack. Southern part of the state, casino gambling, and all of what that did in those days. Probably not enough, but jobs and the revitalization of that area. The Pinelands, the income tax. These are massive, incredible kinds of projects, and he was a doer.
Don just made a reference to style problems and one-word answers. What can you say to that?
That was a problem in the beginning and in the first term, basically, and dealing with legislators. I mean, I recall a number of legislators who were members of the party who were very vocal in opposition to Brendan because they said he didn't have the savvy. He didn't have the political smarts. He gave, as they said and many said, one-word answers.
To them, to the press, what were they talking about?
To them, to the press, to the style. His style of governing was different than what they had, I guess, seen in the past, and that whatever they expected. But he was Brendan, and that was his style, and that was the manner in which he conducted himself. And
so
many people,
you didn't see a problem with it back then?
There was a problem in communication, in these one-word answers, and in the manner in which he was dealing with them. But I didn't see that as a major problem that couldn't be cured. Okay? Now, I wasn't really with Brendan every single day and part of the real inner circle of every day. I was really more observing, and I was able to say a lot of things that probably others would be afraid to say. So I would be with Brendan just off the record, kind of say, I would do it this way, and what about this? And others may not be as critical or straightforward.
So you told him, go ahead and run in 77.
Run.
Why?
Because I first thought, well, first I knew Brendan and what he had done from as long as I had known him. And I think the thing that is most impressive with him is that he's an honest man. He's a guy who was genuinely interested, and if you had to look at it from the point of view of government, interested in the governed and what is really good. If there's an issue, how do you fund government the fairest, most equitable way? That would be the way Brendan would analyze it. And what did he do? He came up with the income tax. You can criticize that because we didn't have one at the time. But my view, his view, and the view of many, and probably if you had to do anything today, the income tax, as you can see today, isn't enough.
Did you play a role in the 77 campaign?
I played a role in the 77 campaign. I traveled with Brendan often. I also was part of a very, very small group that met, did some brainstorming.
Who was in that group?
There were people I met with Brendan, with Dick, Leon, with Henry Luther, yeah, and Degnan.
So you traveled with Brendan. You were
Well,
friend and advisor, but you didn't have a formal role in the campaign.
No.
You were practicing law.
Practicing law. When I left the governor's office, I opened an office in Newark, at Gateway. We were doing. I put together a group more involved in corporate work than anything else, and I started with lawyers who were very much involved in patent, trademark, and corporate law. And we formulated that from 1976 to the present day. In those days, we were maybe 4 or 5, and maybe I started with 6 lawyers.
Today?
Today we have just about 40.
I want to ask you about the law firm and the governor joining the law firm. But before I do that, let me just get your impressions of some of the political figures you dealt with during the Byrne administration. Just give us your quick recollections of people like David Wilentz.
Great guy. David Wilentz, and I dealt with him quite often. First in the role when I was in the governor's office, and then with the Racing Commission. Wilentz had, number one, it was colorful. Number two, as bright as he can, as any person you ever want to meet. A fighter, strong-willed with an incredible personality, and that probably, that umbrella of the David Wilentz personality to the present day, through Warren, through the chief, just incredibly bright, and articulate people, all of them.
Harry Lerner.
Harry Lerner, a very, very astute political person. I liked him. I found him to be open and honest, and a man of his word. I spent many days going to Trenton, and I would take him down on days where Harry had a matter to deal with, or we had a matter that we wanted some particular bill to be worked on, and we needed the support of his delegation. I spent time with him. He was a doer. He was able to get things done. Very colorful, and I thought a good guy.
Fitzpatrick of Bayonne.
Good person. Again, in a political sense, able to deal with Hudson County, which was something that you could never predict. Hudson was Hudson then, and it is today.
What does that mean?
That means that in all of Hudson, it's very difficult to predict and to say who the leader is. You may think you have an open and shut arrangement on a particular matter. Even when you sit there and you have a handshake on it, and you leave, you never can tell what's going to happen until you count the votes on that delegation. And we had Dick Coffey. Dick Coffey was in and out. There were a lot of. You had Jimmy Dugan, who was the chairman, and Jimmy Dugan was really I'm going to say almost a critic of BT.
On what basis? What was he concerned about?
He was a senator. He was unable to communicate. He was very critical. Those kinds of things that, and I see Dugan today. It's a different kind of a relationship.
Was he a thorn in the governor's side?
He was tough to deal with.
Why?
Because let's face it, he's supposed to be, as the state Democratic chairman, he's our outward rep, and really should be dealing with and for what the program is that the governor puts in place. That didn't always happen.
He didn't like the income tax?
He didn't like the income tax. He didn't like a lot of things.
Did he hurt the governor?
Depends. In the long run, no. No. I don't think anybody in the long run hurt Brendan Byrne. I think that as time went on, and even as he came out and where he is today, he is more of a statesman today than probably any former governor, although I also think a great deal of Tommy Kaine.
What was your impressions back then of Tom Kaine?
Well, I had a unique situation with Tom Kaine, as crazy as this may seem. I chauffeured his father, Robert Winthrop Kaine, during his campaigns when I was in school. I was in law school. He was running
for Congress?
For U.S., I think it was the Senate that he was running for. And I chauffeured him. Spent a lot of time with him. Was up at the house in Livingston, and would drop him off, pick him up, that kind of thing. So I knew Tommy. I knew his mother, knew his sister, and I knew the family. And I, till this day, I'm have an affinity with Tommy Kaine more than probably any other governor other than Brendan Byrne.
Did you have a sense back then that he'd be a governor someday?
Well, I had a sense that he would be very much involved, but not specifically then that this would be the next governor.
How about Ray Bateman?
Bateman, good guy, good person. Um, I think a very, very formidable candidate, opponent. I think he's a person of depth, and he's a quality guy.
Why did Byrne beat Bateman? One-term Byrne. Why did he win?
Well, I think Bateman made some errors in the campaign, but overall, I think the people, saw Brendan more than the political process presented, and they saw what he was and what he could do, and he should have won, and he did win.
Do you recall any interaction between Brendan and various celebrities during those years?
Well, he loved the celebrities, Brendan. I know he I can actually go back to, and you probably don't know, Madame Juritza. She was an opera star. Brendan was very close to her, and would go to the opera and would be at events that she was interested in, and he ultimately was interested in. He had a relationship with Connie Francis that came out of a relationship with Connie's brother, who was also an assistant prosecutor later on after I got out. And as Connie went through her career, peaks and valleys, there would often be conversations and calls, and it's interesting. I think Brendan, they honored Connie recently. I think Brendan went. When I say recently, I mean within the last couple of months. She had many, many problems. The brother got shot and killed, and she never was able to really overcome that tragedy. But we spoke to her all the way through those bad days. He I think on a number of occasions was in the company of Princess Grace, Sinatra, Bob Hope. He played golf with many of these people as they came into the state for charitable events and for whatever events. He got very friendly with Tom Carvel, subsequent to. He was a great Yankee fan. Got friendly with George Steinbrenner, and he and I, on many occasions, went to opening day or an event at Yankee Stadium. Brendan knew I was a great Yankee fan myself, so till this day he would buzz me and say, "You want to go to the stadium?" And we went many times. Golfers, tennis pros. Brendan had I think he liked to have the ability to go to those events and to meet with those stars.
He boxed a few rounds with Muhammad Ali once.
He boxed with Muhammad Ali, but he was good at that. Brendan was good to get the focal point of the public interested in the entertainment world through his efforts and the events that he was interested in.
Did you go on any trips with Brendan when he was governor?
I went to I don't know whether it was 2 or 3 to Europe, to Las Vegas, to the islands, to Germany, to we did a mission, a trade mission to Germany and some states around that. Yes, I traveled with him on a number of those.
Good times?
Good times. To bed early. We went to the bar convention in Las Vegas. Went to a bar convention in New Orleans. I traveled with him a lot.
He sometimes got criticized for traveling too much. Was he sensitive to that? Did he ignore it? Was it an issue?
I didn't think it was an issue. Maybe today's press would handle it differently than it was handled then. There were times there were criticisms on the use of the helicopter. There were times there were criticisms on trips, photo ops that they took that I can think of. I would go in and tell them, I said, well, you know, you really...
don't pose in a bathing suit.
Yeah, don't pose in a bathing suit, that kind of stuff.
Did the press generally like Brendan, do you think? Did they understand him?
I don't know if they liked or they disliked. My feeling was that he would come out okay with the press. There were some times that I thought the press was unfair, but by today's standards, whole different ball game. He probably couldn't do some of the things he did in those days.
You traveled with him. What other kinds of contacts did you have with him during the second term? Did you see him frequently?
Yes.
Down at Morven?
He would call. I'd see him at Morven. We would do things together. Would have lunch. Would have dinner.
Do you recall your discussions about his joining your firm?
Sure. I went down and as a matter of fact, I don't know what he did, what other conversations he had with others. But I went down and I said, you know, I put together a small group. We're here.
When did you do this?
Probably a number of months before termination of the second term. I said, you got to, you know, think about what you would like to do. Obviously, we have a rapport. I didn't really have to say too much, nor did I. But I said, obviously, if you want to practice, and that's the area that, you know, you'd like to get involved in, post-gubernatorial.
What area? Corporate?
Practice in law in because there are larger firms, there are firms that were mainstays, in New Jersey, in New York. But where I am, you are. If you want to come,
what did he say?
There's less formality in this relationship.
What did he say?
And he said, you know, it makes sense. Let me think about it. And you know, to be honest, I can't even tell you where, when, and what he said. But all I know is that at some point, and I'd like to say it had to be maybe in November of the preceding year. And then we said, okay, and We talked about the name of the firm and all that sort of stuff.
Was that a happy moment for you?
Sure. He's my friend. He's a guy that I knew for a long time. He's a good person. And he and I had many things in common in those days and today.
Do you think you're best friends?
Best is a word that we are deep-rooted friendships, not involving or that evolved out of a political mechanism, but he knows me and I know him.
What's he like as a lawyer?
He's an exceptionally quick thinker, very he has the ability to analyze. He can look at problems, legal problems. His analysis is usually well-founded. He was on the bench, so therefore he knows the judicial temperament and thinking abilities, and he brings a great deal in the legal sense to the firm. Now, that doesn't mean he's here every day doing legal work. He's not. And in the beginning, he was more involved in client matters than he is today as well.
Was he a rainmaker for the firm?
You know, it's a funny thing. The simple fact that his name is in the firm makes him a rainmaker. He's a kind of a person that the general public thinks highly of, and therefore he forces the firm in many different ways. Many different ways.
What type of client would the firm steer his way back in the days when he was a little more active? What type of client would he represent?
Well, take Tom Carvel, for instance. Step back, and I think it was 81. He brought a client to the firm, Alitalia Airlines. All right. I actually handled the account, but Brendan brought him in. And he had the ability to deal with the directors of that firm firsthand. We traveled to Italy often with what they call Centrale Legali, the legal department, and he and I discussed many issues, legal issues. Alitalia in those days was in the port. JFK. Newark was not really a gateway of great prominence. It is today. Tom Carvel, another client, Brendan was able to discuss with them. That was a group, incidentally, that had some buddies of Carvel, Steinbrenner, Lee Iacocca, and Brendan struck up a good relationship with Carvel, so we represented Carvel all over. And Brendan ultimately handled that account himself. He actually would handle cases that came up through the Carvel corporate entities. He had other matters, but on that level.
Let's talk about your background just for a couple of minutes. Where were you born?
I was born in Newark. I'm a Newark, well, actually Bergen County, born in Newark, Lyndhurst, and went to Fordham.
Where'd you go to high school?
I went to Lyndhurst High School.
What'd your parents do?
My parents, my father was a manager of a Whitlock Cordage Company, a rope factory in Jersey City. Hard worker. My mother was a seamstress, well ahead of her time. She then got into the garment business through that, started her own factory, employed about 240 people.
Where?
In Byrne County.
Did she become wealthy? Did the family become wealthy as a result?
Family was not wealthy in those terms, but we were very comfortable. We had 2 factories in the garment industry. And that was in my days of being at Fordham.
Brothers and sisters?
I have one sister. She was a designer, fashion designer, and worked in one of our plants. I went to Fordham, graduated high up in the class, got a scholarship to Rutgers Law School, was on full scholarship as the alumni scholar in Rutgers. Came out of Rutgers, became an attorney, and
Married?
Married.
At what point?
When I was in law school. Have 4 children.
Who'd you marry?
Married Joan Lopreet. She went to Marymount College. We met in college, basically. Wonderful person, just a great person. We're married we got married 56. We're married 53 years.
Congratulations.
And our father was a very, very wonderful person, well ahead of his time. Was the owner and founder of the Lincoln. A grandfather was the owner, founder of the Lincoln National Bank in Newark. And Harry, my father-in-law, was a director and owner, one of the principal owners. They became the founders of Carteret Savings Bank. And Harry was quite an investor and a significant person here in Essex, New Jersey.
How should we understand your friend Brendan Byrne in the broad sweep of New Jersey politics over the past 50, 60 years? What's his place?
I think if you had to take a look at governors, and it's interesting, because I don't think that the general population has the same kind of esteem for a governor or state government, and you can go county government and municipal, as they do in the national level. President, they're much more focused and probably have had more opportunity to study and understand the presidency. You don't study and understand the governor. You don't get that in school that much as you're coming through life. But if you had to pick a governor in history who had an unusual ability to do the kinds of things that most touched the constituency, Brendan should come out as number 1, or certainly at the top. In New Jersey, other than the fact that you had Woodrow Wilson, who became a national figure, and taking a look at the governors here in New Jersey, Brendan is certainly in any group that you want to put of the most outstanding. For the reason I just said, he touched the most people, touched them in a good way, and he really had their interests at heart. I saw it. I was with him.